Picture this. It's been a good week. A great week, actually. You're in that phase, you know the one. New relationship, long weekend, nothing on the calendar, nowhere to be. The kind of week where the pizza boxes stack up on the nightstand and your phone dies and you genuinely lose track of what day it is. And at some point, maybe day 3 or 4, something starts to feel off. Not emotionally, physically. There's a dull ache somewhere you didn't know could ache. You're exhausted in a way that sleep isn't fixing. Your lower back has filed a formal complaint, and you're lying there thinking, is this a good problem to have? Am I fine? Is my body fine? Spoiler alert, your body has opinions, strong ones, and it has been expressing them in ways you probably didn't recognize as symptoms. Welcome to the science of what actually happens when you push the biological machinery past the point it was designed to run at. Not a lecture, not a moral conversation, straight physiology. Because your body does not care how good a time you are having. It runs on chemistry, not enthusiasm. And chemistry has a budget. Grab something to drink. We're going system by system. First, let's define the question everyone's too embarrassed to actually answer. How much is too much? Here's the honest scientific answer. There is no universal number. The International Society for Sexual Medicine will tell you there is no medically agreed upon upper limit for healthy sexual frequency, which sounds like good news, and for the most part, it is. But here's the part researchers don't put in the headline. A study from Qingdao University that analyzed multiple data sets on sexual frequency and health outcomes found that beyond a certain threshold, defined in their analysis as more than once per day, consistently, the health curve doesn't keep climbing. It flattens. Then it starts going the other direction. Their observation was blunt. Sexual activity is a form of aerobic exercise. And just like aerobic exercise, excessive frequency begins to produce the exact opposite of the benefits that moderate frequency provides. So the question is not moral. The question is physiological. And the answer lives inside what your body is actually doing when it gets pushed past the recovery window. Let's go through it. Stage 1, spam. The muscles, the thing nobody warns you about. Sex is exercise. This is not a metaphor. At moderate intensity, sexual activity demands 3 to 4 METs, the same metabolic load as brisk walking or light yard work. Your heart rate climbs to between 90 and 130 beats per minute. Your muscles are contracting, sustaining positions, generating force, and doing all of this repeatedly without the warm-up routine you'd give any other physical activity. Now think about what you'd say to someone who ran hard every single day without a rest day, who went to the gym twice a day, every day, back to back. You'd tell them they're going to get hurt, not because the exercise is bad, but because recovery is not optional. It is literally when the adaptation happens. The muscle repair, the tissue regeneration, the strength building, all of that occurs during rest, not during the effort. When you skip that window for sex, the same rules apply. The pelvic floor muscles, a group of muscles that almost nobody thinks about until something goes wrong, are bearing a significant share of the load. For women, these muscles are contracting rhythmically through every orgasm, supporting every position under sustained mechanical demand. For men, the lumbar muscles and perineal muscles are bearing repetitive strain with every thrust, and both contract sharply during ejaculation. The result of skipping recovery time, the same result as any overused muscle group. Soreness that builds session by session. Micro tears that don't fully heal before the next round. And a specific creeping lower back pain that men who've had this exact week and will immediately recognize. Not dramatic, just there, all the time, worsening. Fun fact, the pelvic floor is one of the most undertreated injury sites in the human body, precisely because nobody talks about it. Physical therapists who specialize in pelvic floor rehabilitation exist specifically because overuse of this muscle group, from any cause, produces real, sometimes chronic dysfunction. The muscles that nobody thinks about are often the ones that take the longest to heal. Stage 2, the plumbing. And what bacteria think of your good week? Here is where it gets unglamorous fast, and where women specifically draw the short biological straw. Every sexual encounter introduces bacteria to the urethra. This is not a hygiene failure. It is anatomy. The urethra is short, the proximity is unavoidable, and bacteria, primarily E. coli, are mobile, opportunistic, and extremely good at their jobs. Under normal circumstances, your immune system clears this. Your body flushes it. This is what the pee after sex advice is actually about, mechanically clearing the urethra before bacteria can establish a foothold. But here's what happens when the sessions stack up without adequate recovery time. The tissue around the urethra and vaginal walls is experiencing repeated mechanical friction. Micro-irritations accumulate. Tiny breaks in the mucosal lining that would heal with 24 to 48 hours of rest don't get that window. And broken skin, even at a microscopic level, is an open door. Meanwhile, your body has been running its stress response repeatedly. Every sexual encounter spikes adrenaline, norepinephrine, and cortisol. Moderate amounts of this are completely normal and actually beneficial. This is the biochemistry of a healthy stress and recovery cycle. But stack it day after day without adequate rest, and cortisol doesn't clear between cycles. It builds. And chronically elevated cortisol does something very specific and very damaging. It suppresses the immune function responsible for clearing the exact bacteria that sexual activity introduces to the urinary tract. Your immune system, weakened by cortisol overload, lets something through that it normally wouldn't. And now you have a urinary tract infection that feels entirely disconnected from cause and effect because it showed up 3 days after the week started. Women experience this at dramatically higher rates than men. The female urethra is approximately 4 centimeters long. The male urethra is approximately 20 centimeters. The bacteria simply have less distance to travel. This is not a design flaw. It's just a trade-off that the body wasn't built to compensate for at high frequency without rest. Stage 3, the brain. The part that breaks in the most interesting way. This is the one that nobody talks about, and it is by far the most scientifically fascinating consequence of sustained high-frequency sexual activity. Your brain runs on dopamine, not just for sex, for everything. Motivation, focus, the will to get out of bed, the satisfaction of finishing a task, the pleasure of food, music, conversation. Dopamine is the currency your brain uses to say, "This was worth it, do it again." Every orgasm produces a significant dopamine surge, the same mesolimbic reward pathway that lights up for food, for music, for winning. It fires, hard, repeatedly. And for a while, this is wonderful. But your brain is not a passive receiver of dopamine. It actively regulates. When any receptor system gets flooded repeatedly, the brain does something called downregulation. It reduces the number and sensitivity of the receptors receiving that signal. Think of it like a venue turning down the volume because the speakers keep blowing. The signal is still there. The brain just starts responding to it less. This is called tolerance. And it is not a moral failure or a weakness. It is literally how your brain's hardware protects itself from overstimulation. The practical effect? Pleasure begins to flatten. Not suddenly, gradually. The thing that felt extraordinary on day 1 starts to feel ordinary by day 4. The baseline moves. And to feel what you felt at the start, your brain starts suggesting you need more, different, or more intense stimulation to reach the same response. This is the dopamine desensitization cycle. In research on compulsive sexual behavior disorder, a recognized clinical condition in the ICD-11, shows that when this cycle continues without interruption, the prefrontal cortex, your impulse control and decision-making center, begins to show reduced activity. Not permanently, not irreversibly in most cases, but measurably. The brain that was helping you make good decisions is gradually getting quieter, while the limbic system pushing for more stimulation gets louder. Fun fact, this is the exact same neurological mechanism that underlies substance addiction. Different trigger, identical circuitry. Researchers studying compulsive sexual behavior have found the same fingerprints in brain scans, reduced prefrontal activity, hypersensitized reward circuitry, that appear in imaging of substance dependency. Your brain does not categorize its addictions, it just runs the same software. Stage 4, the chemistry. Where oxytocin stops being your friend. Oxytocin is often called the love hormone, and in moderate amounts, it earns that name. It bonds you to people. It builds trust, reduces anxiety, creates that warm, open feeling after intimacy. But oxytocin doesn't discriminate. It bonds you to whoever is present when it surges, which means that in a high-frequency sexual context, especially with a casual partner, you are repeatedly dosing yourself with a bonding chemical, whether or not bonding is your intention. And then there's what happens to the oxytocin signal when it's fired too frequently. The same principle that applies to dopamine, receptor downregulation, begins to apply here too. The emotional intensity of the connection can start to flatten, not because the feeling is false, but because the signal is getting quieter through repetition. The profound feeling of closeness that comes after a deeply intimate encounter starts to require more and more stimulation to reach. Some couples who go through intensely high-frequency phases report a strange emotional flatness afterward. Not a breakdown of connection, but a temporary blunting of it. The instrument that plays intimacy has been overplayed and needs to rest before it rings true again. The science calls this hedonic adaptation. You may know it by a more common name, taking someone for granted. Stage 5. The tank, running on empty. Let's talk about what is actually depleted. Every session burns 3 to 5 calories per minute. Over a long, vigorous encounter, that's 60 to 100 calories. Not catastrophic, but multiply that by daily or twice daily frequency without adequate nutrition replacement, and you're running a consistent caloric deficit on top of physical exertion. Combine that with the dehydration that comes from sustained sweating and elevated heart rate. Your fluid levels drop. Your body responds by producing a hormone called angiotensin, which causes blood vessels to constrict and blood pressure to rise, which means the cardiovascular system, which is already doing consistent, moderate exercise level work, is now doing it against higher resistance than normal. For men, there's an additional layer. Sperm production requires approximately 64 to 74 days for a complete spermatogenesis cycle. High-frequency ejaculation cannot accelerate this. What it does instead is progressively reduce sperm count and motility in subsequent ejaculations as the supply outpaces regeneration. This is relevant not just for fertility, but as a signal that the body's reproductive system is running below optimal capacity. And then there's sleep, or rather, the absence of it. Research from 2023 found that 75% of people reported better sleep after sexual activity close to bedtime because of the prolactin and cortisol drop that follows orgasm. But that benefit assumes recovery time. If you're reducing total sleep duration because the activity is pushing well into the night, repeatedly, you are depleting the one resource the body uses to repair literally everything else on this list. The tissue micro tears, the dopamine receptor recovery, the immune function rebuilding, all of it runs on sleep. Running low on sleep is running low on everything. Here's where we land. Your body is not a machine that runs on pleasure. It is a machine that runs on cycles of effort and recovery, of stimulation and rest, of chemical surge and rebalancing. Sex sits inside those cycles. It is not outside them. And when you push the cycle hard enough, long enough, without the downtime the system requires, the body does what biology always does when it's pushed past design parameters. It sends you a bill. The muscles ache. The bacteria find their opening. The dopamine receptors go quiet. The emotional bandwidth narrows. The plumbing protests. Not because sex is harmful, it demonstrably isn't at moderate frequency, but because excess of any physiological demand eventually outstrips the body's ability to recover between rounds. Here's the thing that nobody ever says plainly. The sweet spot isn't defined by a number. It's defined by recovery. You know you're in it when every encounter feels as good as or better than the last. When the chemistry is still responding, the tissue isn't screaming, the sleep is landing, and the emotional signal hasn't gone flat. The moment any of those start tipping, your body is already leaving you a voicemail. The question is whether you check it. If you want to keep learning what your body is actually doing while you're too busy living in it to notice, hit subscribe. The machinery is fascinating once you know where to look.